Hello, and welcome to Doctor Who 50 years ago, the show that looks back to the episode that aired in 1966 and looks at what's different between then and now. This week, The Power of the Daleks, episode 5. I am Ben.
I am Luke.
I'm Nick.
And now we'll go into the news from 1966. On Monday, November 28th, the Soyuz program of space vehicles/rockets began. The first, unmanned, was automatically destroyed, but the rockets continued to be flown until the present day, being the most cost-effective way of getting up to space.
But I guess it's interesting, again, we're still using space technology from the 60s, even now.
Also on that day, the King of Burundi was overthrown by his Prime Minister, who had helped him plot the coup that deposed the King's father less than 5 months ago. This was a bloodless coup, as the King was out of the country at the time. The PM declared himself the first president of Burundi, and then would begin a campaign to purge Hutu tribesmen from the government, ultimately leading to the first Burundian genocide.
So I was thinking, isn't it quite sad that two quite small countries, actually, they're not very big, next to each other, both had genocides relatively recently?
It's extremely fitting for the episode that lies ahead.
Yeah, you're right.
Moving on Wednesday, November the 30th, Barbados was granted independence from the United Kingdom after 341 years of British rule.
I imagine that speaking English, first of all, is a very good thing. You have a wonderful climate for the entire year. It never goes below about 20 degrees C, so it's a perfect winter destination. I know it probably gets a lot of tourism from the US, wealthy American tourists, so yeah, it's going to have that sort of atmosphere, and there'll be a lot of, if it's like the Bahamas, there'll be a clique of, let's say, wealthy white businessmen who ensure that the government is amenable to business interests, let's say, which would encourage tourism.
Also on that day, the US, South Vietnam and other allies agreed to a proposal from the Viet Cong for ceasefires during the holidays, including the Vietnamese holiday of Tet. This ultimately sets up the Tet Offensive of 1968, that one when America realised victory was nigh on impossible. So it's all building up quite nicely.
Obviously, at this point, the US and South Vietnam would imagine that they're winning, and I suppose they were. So do you think that they agreed to this ceasefire to look like the good guys?
I guess that's possible, yeah.
And to get on the side of the Vietnamese, because if this is a big holiday for the country, they'd want to appear like that they're friends of the Vietnamese. So they're like, let's have a ceasefire whilst you guys celebrate. We don't want to.
Ultimately, it blows up in their faces when they use the holiday to their advantage. But
although the Tet Offensive was actually a massive defeat for the Viet Cong, and it pretty much wiped them out. But it was a propaganda victory for North Vietnam.
And also, the American Medical Association learns from a Dr. Ralph Greenson that at least more than 100 people, I think in the LA area, Los Angeles, wanted to change their gender. American males, he said, were becoming indifferent to sex, that's a quote, and he said it was horrifying, also a quote, that he wanted, quote, basic instincts to win out, a true equality of the sexes to emerge, and ultimately hoped that sex would be fun again. On Friday, December the 2nd, 1966, Harold Wilson and Ian Smith, the latter being Prime Minister of Rhodesia, met on HMS Tiger for negotiations about Rhodesia's predicament, being a independent country that pretty much took control from the British in an act of barbarous traitorism or something like that.
Well, it wasn't the intention to bring them back and then grant them independence under a black majority government, as opposed to the white minority.
I suppose that was one of the many things that he opposed.
Yeah, I mean, Rhodesia was the last African country to be officially granted independence because of that. This
Yeah,
whole minority government unilaterally declaring.
to make it
Um,
end up as Zimbabwe. Yeah.
yeah, so I suspect perhaps it was more the fact we wanted to bring it back to the fold was then quickly get rid of it to save face, as I imagine this was probably quite an embarrassing thing for Britain.
Yeah. And finally, on Saturday, December the 3rd, the United States carried out Project Sterling, which was a test to determine whether the sound of an underground nuclear explosion could be muffled. They did this in Mississippi, seemingly successfully, because they didn't hear a sound.
Wasn't it a couple of years later that they got the test ban treaty enforced? I believe they agreed to that. So for I think it was 1968. After that, the
Yeah,
US,
I think it was under.
Russia,
I would have said it was under Nixon.
yeah, 68, 69, something like that. I think that they agreed to stop doing these sorts of tests. It is concerning that they were still doing this.
And that was the news. Hope you enjoyed it. And now we shall get on to Power of the Daleks, Episode 5, written by that man, David Whittaker. Yes, this episode really does set it up very well for the conclusion. All the goodies and baddies are very much designated as where they stand, where they will be in the conflict that will ensue in Episode 6, with the rebels firmly in control of the colony and slightly mad. Lesterson gone insane. The Doctor and Quinn desperately trying to get out to stop the Daleks, but those Daleks have massed up an army and are going to kill everyone. It's very, very good indeed.
I think in this episode you're starting to see the payoff of the excellent setup. You know, with the governor being overthrown, so on and so forth, like that. You're starting to get the payoff, but next week it will really be the big payoff.
I'm having flashbacks to what I was saying about the 10th Planet Part 3, where at the end of that I said we had an episode building up the setting, we had an episode building up the Cybermen, we had an episode building up the characters, so that all the pieces should come together for the final episode, and I really invested in it. It's so good to see that we can take a step back from what the Doctor's doing and thinking just to see how the Daleks can have a colony completely destroyed. You wouldn't even need the Doctor here at this point in the story, because it's just so wonderful to see these people be manipulated to the point where you can feel the dread that everything is about to come to a horrible conclusion. This is the first time since The Dancing Floor, The Celestial Toymaker Part 3, on the 16th of April 1966, that the viewing figures went above 8 million.
This is probably partly due to Patrick Troughton slowly winning over an audience, probably through word of mouth, partly because of the Daleks, and partly because it's a very good story.
Yeah.
Let's have a look at this episode in greater detail. We open on Lesterson watching the Daleks build themselves because, let's face it, they did quite a lot of Ealing and they had to show it twice because it's a very good scene of Daleks reproducing. And naturally, Lesterson taps in with his human instincts and freaks out. He tries to stop the power and fails because the Daleks have stored their power. They're not idiots. The Daleks make sure that they aren't suspicious, which is a bit late, but never mind, before telling the audience the chilling line that they are not ready yet to teach these human beings the law of the Daleks.
Starting with Lesterson, he says duplicating rather than reproducing, exactly. And it's as though he can't bear to think of them as anything else except robots, because he's seen that they are creatures rather than just machines now. Yeah. But he's still unable to think of them as flesh, and
As a superior intelligence.
they outright state to the audience, there is a law of the Daleks. It makes them seem so much more threatening because it gives them a purpose beyond survive and kill. They are trying to inflict their own vision upon the people that they find.
It organises and unites them under a common cause, which is murder everything that isn't their own, under that purely fascistic term of racial purity. Yeah. Meanwhile, back with the Doctor, still in prison, he does his sonic test and tries desperately to work out what the Daleks are doing with power. In comes Lesterson, who madly rants at him and tells him the stakes before being dragged away. And meanwhile, the Doctor continues to act on getting out, with Quinn serving as his assistant because Ben's not in this episode.
While there is a Ben replacement, he has basically nothing to do. And I think that shows what a Doctor Light episode this is, and how it doesn't really matter that Michael Craze isn't there. He doesn't need to be there at all.
Meanwhile, we cut back to Bragan, who is very much in control. Lesterson barges in and discovers what the Daleks are doing, giving more power for themselves under the pretense of giving the colony emergency power supply, and terrifies and almost taunts Lesterson, pretty much. Lesterson tries to get the governor, but Janley arrives and takes him away, and it's interesting to see that both Janley and Bragan treat Lesterson as some sort of senile or mad person, especially when Lesterson asks, "You think I'm mad?" and both of them instantly reply simultaneously, "No, no, no." It's showing how fully they're colluding with one another. The Daleks are, of course, still increasing their power, so they can go around the colony and kill everyone. This is being helped by Valmar, who is also in charge of a bound and slightly gagged Polly, who banter whilst Valmar gives them their power. Polly argues with Valmar, discovers Ben is captured, but Polly, being the mouthpiece that she is, reasons with Valmar, who starts having doubts and starts coming on the side of her and the Doctor. It's interesting that they see the Daleks as pepper pots. I've put down. They actually canonise the fact that people see them as pepper pots. They've already seen them as motorised dustbins in the Dalek invasion of Earth, but they've used the P word.
Finally, we've got a bit of pop culture starting to leak into Classic Who.
They're becoming self-aware. Other interesting bits in the argument between Polly and Valmar is Polly uses the specific phrase of the Doctor says that they're capable of exterminating whole nations. She doesn't say worlds. She focuses on nations. This is probably in the mindset of the youth, who she hasn't left 1966 Earth for that long, and so obviously she's used to the mindset of nations rather than planets, because Vulcan in TV story is still Ben and Polly's first planet.
Yeah, I mean, you got to assume that she's well, not the character, but also the writing. It's going to be playing more to the Daleks are Nazis in space sort of vibe to that. I guess.
You don't need to say much. It's like a shorthand. She's basically saying these people are like the Nazis, and people are so scared of that that's all you need to spin them around.
That was definitely the case with the older generation, but I'd also argue that the Daleks are sort of responsible in some cases for the generational conflict between the old and the young, especially when it ends up with the riots of '68 and all that, because the Daleks are fascist, that's so ingrained in the Doctor Who stories and stuff that it sort of oversaturates the youth, who slowly become disillusioned with the older generation and the society that they've created, and the youth sort of say, "Hey, we don't want to hear this anymore. Can we hear things like peace and stuff? Thanks." And the older generation say, no, you need to be constantly aware of the fascist menace and the communist menace and all that. And so this conflict arises. And so the Daleks could be partly to blame for that.
That's very interesting.
Doctor and Quinn finally get out of jail. Whoopee. So they can go and run around and find Polly and Ben and all that jazz.
He seemed a bit tone deaf to me.
Yes.
What is that line? Because it seems like a joke, but it's not.
It's not very good.
Joking on anything.
No, it kind of falls flat.
Good how much that line sticks out, because there are many stories where you'd forget about that in an instant, but the writing has been so strong and the dialogue so punchy and memorable.
It's the weakest thing of the entire serial, you could argue.
Yeah.
Definitely.
We get to arguably the main scene of the of this episode, and that's Bragan fully establishing his takeover of the colony. Hensel comes in and argues with Bragan and discovers that the Doctor's in jail and he's been deposed. They have a little argument, but Hensel is naive enough to not realise that Bragan has force. He gets out a Dalek gun and kills Hensel using a Dalek. So there we are. Bragan has fully taken over the colony, but it doesn't stop from yet another chilling line from the Dalek, who utters the immortal line of, "Why do human beings kill human beings?"
But this scene made me realise a few episodes ago I compared the rebels and the fear of the rebels to a Western fear of communism, and I realised I was completely wrong about that. And actually, the rebels and then their rise to power mirrors fascism's rise in the 20s and 30s, I think. And so, especially, I think the Dalek line here, where they say, "Why do human beings kill human beings?" They're like, why are fascists killing fascists? You know, because the Daleks are all fascists, as it were. They couldn't understand breaking that purity.
I saw it as a strange thing because it seemed very establishment to me. And the fact that he has control over the strange beings that he's picked up, he's ensuring his own safety because he knows that his forces could overthrow him at any moment. And it sounds like a very British fear because of all the people going independent at this time. What if these countries turn to war against us? We have to keep some sort of repute with them because, well, we've been horrible to them. We need to have control over when they're armed and not armed to ensure our own safety above anything.
There we are. A bit of action happens with Valmar and Polly being met up by the Doctor, learning the Daleks' power plans and Hensel's return. The rebels are spooked. Quinn frees Polly in a heated exchange of fists, and they run away from Daleks with guns, who break through a flimsy barrier of a spanner locking the door, which is almost a metaphor of the Daleks are freeing themselves from their guise of servitude and are now able to kill everyone. So their uprising can begin. They chant, waiting for the human beings to fight amongst themselves, knowing that their day is coming. It's coming in the next 5 minutes.
What's good about this bit from a structural point of view is it's sort of a little warm-up to the intense action of next week, because this has been a very talky episode. We now have a bit of running and hiding and shooting to get ourselves into the spirit for when we get to seek, annihilate, destroy.
Yes. Lovely. The Doctor, Quinn and Polly discover the dead Hensel, and they give him an obituary, saying that events turned out against him and ultimately he was a good governor.
Romancing what came before when you're heading into something uncertain.
Yeah.
It's that fear of the future and the unknown that makes you think, wasn't it good just now?
Reagan comes in, declares martial law, thinking that the Daleks are on his side because he's power mad, and seemingly locks up the Doctor again. And it's this feeling of hopelessness that the Doctor is powerless to stop the Daleks, but the Daleks take up their opportunity and are given their order to advance in the colony from their spaceship. Like I said, they're able to free themselves from the chains of servitude and kill everyone. Daleks conquer and destroy. All four of them go round and round and set up the denouement, which is the next episode.
And this is the perfect final cliffhanger. The Daleks are now finally revealing themselves in force. It's a good setup for the action to follow next week. I mean, I guess you guys have covered a lot. I will say the cliffhanger, considering they only have 4 Dalek models to play with, they do make it look like there's more than there are. It's quite clever of them to get them literally just going around the same set. But
it's the power of cardboard cutouts.
It does make them look like there's actually loads of Daleks spilling out. And if you're a child, that must be terrifying thought. Whoa, there's a whole army of Daleks coming to attack.
The fact that the Daleks are uniform, the fact that they all look the same, that there is this mass cardboard army at the back, it really puts into the idea of World War II armies, of the Nuremberg rallies, of all these armies coming, they're coming to kill you.
I think this episode underlines how I think it's showing the bad actions of the rebels and of the humans in the colony. It's very similar and mirrors that of the fascism of the Nazis and therefore the Daleks. And so it's using the Daleks as a sort of comparison in what they're doing and how bad it is.
Comparing this with modern Who, and especially with CGI Daleks, and basically the whole context in which modern Doctor Who is broadcast, you really, really don't get, obviously, fascism as a prevailing theme of every single episode involving Daleks ever. Instead, they're sort of degenerated and just sort of killing robots, aren't they? What are the Daleks portrayed as modern-wise?
Well, they're not even very good killing robots these days, mostly.
Yeah.
No.
They're sort of just shouty tin pots that try to threaten but seem very empty now.
Yeah. Is this because we've grown out of the fascism warning, or?
Well, no, but they were good in Series 1, and that wasn't necessarily to do with fascism. I think it's just they're too easily beaten. They don't kill enough people. They're not nasty enough, I think, these days, especially under Moffat.
The Daleks are always... In Dalek, you have one Dalek. It is powered entirely by hate to wipe out everything it can. However, in all of the later New Who stories, the Daleks want to kill things for some reason that is just sort of vague. It's that they want to kill everyone, but you don't get a sense of that hatred, that why they want to kill everyone. And at the end, RTD always writes himself into the corner of there's 5 minutes of the episode left and billions of Daleks, which I put in there for the episode 1 cliffhanger, and I don't know what to do. So I'm just going to cross them out, basically.
Well, yeah, you're singling RTD out here, but at least his Daleks actually killed a lot of people. Moffat episodes, other than the one that sticks out in my mind is Into the Dalek, but he didn't really write that one. No one dies in them, which is rubbish.
But what I was saying is that while you don't have to have fascism to make the Daleks scary anymore, if you can have that unrelenting, beating at the brain hatred for everything, that is a good hook that's scary and visceral. Whereas having them as grand powers, the head of superpowers, basically, that's not as scary anymore. You can't have that, let's create this massive plan to engage war on many planets, because that's just not how we work anymore. The audience doesn't have that same frame of reference. But if you have that pure, just beating of hate that you can really feel all throughout Dalek, you can get into that. That's basically how I feel about the Daleks nowadays. They're ill-placed.
To the point where they just put future companions in Daleks.
Yes.
Dear me. Yeah, so that was a nice little rant about the Daleks. Then again, that is what we're here for. We're here to look at the Daleks of the past and the Daleks of the present and compare them. And we've done so quite beautifully, I think. That is Doctor Who 50 years ago. Thank you very much for watching. You can find us on Blogspot, which redirects to iTunes, where you can comment and rate us. We're also on Facebook and YouTube, where you can like, comment and subscribe, and other internety things, including Google+, if you dare. Anyway, we'll be back next week with the concluding episode, Power of the Daleks, Episode 6. I've been Ben.
I've been Luke.
And I've been Nick.
Thank you, and goodbye.